The line at the supermarket crawled forward like traffic in a storm. Grace shifted from one foot to the other, cradling a carton of eggs and a loaf of bread, trying not to check the time again. She had an interview in 3 days, the most important one she'd had in years, and her head was already full of answers and rehearsed smiles. She didn't have room for delays or for anything unexpected. Then, the automatic doors hissed open and the wind swept in, carrying a sheet of cold rain and an elderly woman struggling with two heavy bags. One slipped. Apples skittered across the wet tile. The woman flinched, whispering a small, "Oh no," as if she were apologizing to the world for existing. Grace didn't think. She set her groceries on the counter, jogged forward, and dropped to a knee. "I've got them," she said, scooping up bruised fruit and tucking them back into the torn paper bag. The woman's hands shook. The bags were clearly too much for her. "Thank you," she breathed, voice thin but steady. Her eyes were a startling gray, calm, like a sky that knew it could storm again at any moment. "They're heavier than I expected. Let me carry them to your car," Grace said. She didn't offer it like a question. The cashier shot Grace a look. "Are you sure?" But Grace only smiled. "I'll be right back." Outside, the rain drummed on the metal awning. Grace pulled her hood over her hair and followed the woman across the slick parking lot. The bags cut into her forearms. Whatever was inside weighed far more than groceries should. The woman walked slowly, favoring her left leg. "I'm Grace," she said, filling the quiet. "Evelyn," the woman replied. "You have a strong grip, Grace." Grace laughed softly. "I've carried heavier." They reached a silver sedan with a faint scrape along the bumper. Grace set the bags in the trunk and noticed something odd. Not cheap pantry staples like she'd assumed, but fresh produce, a small bouquet wrapped in paper, and a tin of imported tea. Careful choices. Thoughtful. Nothing random. Evelyn handed Grace a wrinkled handkerchief to dry her hands. "You didn't have to come all the way out," she said. "I wanted to," Grace answered, meaning it. "Do you live far?" "Not far." Evelyn studied her for a moment, the way people do when they're weighing something they can't name. "You are in a hurry, aren't you?" "A little," Grace admitted. "I'm preparing for an interview and my brain is a mess." "Ah." Evelyn's mouth curved, not quite a smile. "What kind of work?" "Operations. The kind where you make broken things run on time." She shrugged. "At least that's the plan." Evelyn nodded once, as if cataloging the information. "You'll do," she murmured. Then louder, "Thank you for helping me, Grace." Most people looked away. Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks. Anyone would have done it. Evelyn's eyes said otherwise. "Take an umbrella," she said, reaching into the back seat and offering one still in its wrapper. "Consider it a loan." Grace started to refuse, then saw the rain sheet across the lot, and accepted. "I'll bring it back." "I know," Evelyn said, with a certainty that surprised Grace. "Good luck at your interview." Grace watched the sedan pull away, the taillights smearing red in the rain. The moment felt strangely anchored, as if the day had shifted 1 degree to the left and she hadn't noticed until now. She shook it off, jogged back inside, paid for her groceries, and walked home beneath the borrowed umbrella. That night, she reheated soup, opened her laptop, and practiced her answers. "Tell me about a time you solved a problem. What motivates you? Why our company?" She wrote bullet points, deleted them, rewrote them cleaner. The umbrella leaned against the door, a neat black cane keeping watch. Rain pounded the windows. Between questions, Grace's thoughts drifted to Evelyn, her steady gray eyes, the hint of command in a voice that never rose. There was something about her that didn't fit. The careful groceries, the unflinching gaze, the way she had said, "You'll do," like she was measuring more than kindness. Grace smiled at herself. "You're inventing stories," she thought. "Not everything is a test." The next morning dawned bright. She returned the umbrella to the supermarket, just in case Evelyn passed by again, and left a note with her name. "Thank you for the loan." Then she walked the long way home, rehearsing company facts under her breath, counting the traffic lights like a metronome. By the time the third day arrived, her nerves had settled into a tense, focused hum. She pressed her blouse, tied back her hair, and took the train 2 stops to a glass building that caught the light like a promise. She signed in at the front desk, accepted a visitor's badge, and followed a coordinator down a hallway lined with framed photographs of teams and milestones. "Boardroom's this way," the coordinator said. "Panel interview. You'll do great." Boardroom. Grace's stomach fluttered. She smoothed her resume with her thumb and took a breath that reached all the way to her heels. When the door swung open, the room fell into place like a stage set. Long table, pitchers of water, a wall of windows pouring daylight onto polished wood. And at the head of the table, speaking quietly to an assistant, sat a woman with silver hair and calm gray eyes. Evelyn looked up. Recognition flickered between them. First surprise, then something like understanding. Grace felt the floor tilt beneath her, just a fraction. The borrowed umbrella, "You'll do," the careful way Evelyn and watched her in the rain. The coordinator gestured to a chair. "Grace, you can sit here." Grace sat, heartbeat a bright drum in her throat, and realized this wasn't going to be a normal interview. It was going to be the moment everything shifted. Grace sat rigid in her chair, her palms damp against the folded resume on the table. She couldn't take her eyes off Evelyn. The woman who had dropped apples on the supermarket floor 3 days ago was now sitting at the head of this immaculate boardroom, her silver hair pinned neatly, her posture commanding. The rain-soaked sweater had been replaced by a tailored jacket. She looked every inch the executive. What is happening? Grace's mind whirled. She replayed the moment in the parking lot, the shaky hands, the quiet thank you, the way Evelyn had seemed fragile. But the woman in front of her now wasn't fragile. She radiated authority, her gray eyes sharp as glass. "Grace," said the coordinator, smiling nervously as if sensing the weight in the air. "This is Evelyn Hartman, our founder and CEO." Founder. CEO. Grace's heart slammed against her ribs. Evelyn's lips curved just slightly. Not quite a smile, but not cold either. "We've met," she said calmly, her voice carrying through the room. "Grace was kind enough to help me last week." A ripple of surprise passed through the other panelists. They exchanged glances, suddenly curious. Grace's cheeks flushed. Yes," she stammered. "Just at the store. It wasn't—" "It was," Evelyn interrupted gently, her gaze steady on Grace. "It told me everything I needed to know about your character." The silence that followed was suffocating. Grace tried to find her footing, tried to remind herself why she was here. This is still an interview. Focus. She straightened in her seat, forcing her voice to steady. "I appreciate that, but I'm here because I believe I can add value to your company." Evelyn leaned back slightly, her fingers steepled. "Then let's find out if you're right." The first question came from a man in a navy suit 2 seats down. "Tell us about a time you solved a difficult problem under pressure." Grace's rehearsed answers rattled in her memory, but they sounded flimsy now. Evelyn's gaze pinned her in place. She decided to speak from the truth instead. "When I worked at my last job, a supplier failed to deliver critical materials the night before a major deadline. Everyone panicked. I called every contact I had until I found a replacement. I stayed on the phone past midnight, and the shipment arrived at sunrise. It wasn't perfect, but the project launched on time." The panelist nodded, scribbling notes. Another jumped in. "How do you handle conflict on a team?" Grace drew in a breath, recalling countless small arguments, moments where she had chosen to mediate rather than escalate. She described one calmly, her voice steadier now. But her eyes kept flicking back to Evelyn, who remained silent, watching. She couldn't tell if she was impressed or simply waiting to test her further. Finally, Evelyn spoke again. "Grace, why do you want this position?" The question hit differently from the others. It wasn't technical. It wasn't about skills. It was personal. Grace hesitated, her throat dry. She could give the polished answer she had practiced, "Because I admire your company, because I want to grow in this field." But under Evelyn's piercing gaze, the words felt hollow. So she told the truth. "Because I've spent too long fixing things for other people and being overlooked. I know I can do more than I've been allowed to. I'm ready to prove myself if someone will give me the chance." The room was still. One panelist tapped his pen nervously, another shifted in her seat. But Evelyn didn't move, didn't blink. Her expression was unreadable. At last she nodded once. Honesty. Rare and costly, but it's what I look for. Grace's chest loosened, just a little. The coordinator cleared his throat. That concludes the formal questions. Do you have any for us, Grace? She glanced at Evelyn, then back at the others. Only one, she said quietly. What are you really looking for in this role? Evelyn's gray eyes flickered with something Grace couldn't place. Respect, maybe? Or recognition. Someone who doesn't walk past when they see a burden. Someone who acts. And Grace realized, with a shiver down her spine, that the interview had begun long before she ever stepped into this room. The interview should have been over. Grace felt it in the way the panelists shuffled their notes, the way the coordinator tapped the folder shut. But Evelyn didn't move. She sat at the head of the table, her gray eyes fixed on Grace, with the same weight as when she'd handed her an umbrella in the rain. "Stay a moment," Evelyn said quietly. It wasn't a request. The other interviewers glanced at each other, uncertain, then rose and filed out. The door closed, leaving only the two of them in the bright silence of the boardroom. Grace's pulse quickened. What now? Evelyn folded her hands. "Do you know why I shop for my own groceries?" The question blindsided Grace. She blinked. "Because you like to?" Evelyn shook her head faintly. "Because it tells me who notices, who offers help when there's nothing to gain. It's my test, Grace. Small acts reveal bigger truths." Grace's stomach tightened. So the supermarket wasn't just chance. Evelyn leaned forward slightly. "You passed the first part, but words are easy. Action is harder. I want to see how you act under pressure." Grace swallowed. "What do you mean?" Evelyn rose from her chair, her presence filling the room. "I've arranged a situation downstairs. Real, not staged. A conflict that needs resolution. You'll handle it. No script, no practice, just instinct. If you fail, the position ends here." Grace's breath caught. A situation? Was this normal? It sounded like something out of a test she hadn't studied for. But Evelyn's tone left no room for doubt. It was real. They descended together in silence. Evelyn's heels clicked against the marble floor, each step echoing like a countdown. Grace's palms sweated, but she forced herself to match the pace. In the lobby, chaos unfolded. Two employees stood nose to nose near the reception desk, voices raised, faces red with anger. Papers lay scattered across the floor. A receptionist hovered nearby, helpless, while visitors turned their heads to watch the argument grow louder. "You lost the contract," one man barked. "No, you sabotaged it," the other shot back. Grace froze. The tension was electric, threatening to explode. This wasn't a staged exercise. The fury in their voices, the veins standing out in their necks, this was real. She turned to Evelyn, but the CEO only nodded once. "Show me." Grace inhaled slowly, steadying her nerves. She stepped forward, putting herself between the two men. "Stop," she said firmly, her voice louder than she expected. "Both of you." They blinked at her startled, but their anger flared again. One snapped, "Stay out of this." "No," Grace cut in, her tone sharp. "Look around you. Everyone is watching. Do you want clients and visitors to see this? Do you want to drag the company's name through the mud because you can't control yourselves?" Her words sliced through the heat like cold water. The men shifted, glancing at the bystanders, the receptionist, the eyes glued to them. Shame flickered behind their anger. Grace softened her tone. "You're angry. Fine. But this," she gestured at the papers on the floor, the curious stares, "this isn't solving anything. Sit down. We'll find the truth without tearing each other apart." The silence stretched. Then, reluctantly, both men stooped to gather the papers, avoiding each other's gaze. Their fury hadn't vanished, but it had cooled enough to keep the fire from burning the whole building down.
Grace exhaled slowly, her knees weaker than she wanted to admit. She turned back towards Evelyn, who watched from a distance, unreadable. Finally, Evelyn's lips curved in that almost smile again. Instinct, she said simply. Control through calm. You didn't shrink. You didn't inflame. You chose the middle path. Grace swallowed hard. Was that the test? Evelyn's eyes glimmered. That was the beginning.
The lobby slowly returned to its normal rhythm. The receptionist bent to collect the last scattered papers. Visitors whispered to each other, and the two men retreated in embarrassed silence. But Grace barely noticed. Her pulse was still hammering, her chest tight with the aftermath of adrenaline. Evelyn stood at the edge of the room, composed as ever. She didn't rush to speak, didn't congratulate her. She simply watched, her gray eyes unreadable. Then, with a tilt of her head, she gestured for Grace to follow. They moved through a side hallway, quieter now, the hum of the city fading behind thick glass walls. Evelyn opened a door that led to a private office, spacious, lined with bookshelves, its windows overlooking the skyline. "Sit," Evelyn said, her voice calm but carrying weight. Grace obeyed, clutching the edge of the chair. Was all of that really part of the interview? Evelyn poured 2 glasses of water, setting one in front of Grace. It was part of something bigger. She sat opposite her, folding her hands. "Tell me, Grace, what do you think this company needs most?" Grace hesitated. Innovation? Strong leadership? Evelyn shook her head gently. Trust. People who don't wait for orders, but see what's broken and move to fix it. People who act when no one is watching. Her gaze sharpened. Like you did in the rain. Grace felt her throat tighten. That was nothing. Just groceries. Nothing to you, Evelyn said, her tone firm. Because I wasn't looking for a resume in that moment. I was looking for a person who wouldn't walk past. Grace's thoughts spun. So, this job posting, this interview, was it even real? Evelyn allowed the faintest smile. The position exists, but I don't need another manager. I need something rarer, someone I can trust to stand beside me, to make decisions when I cannot, someone who doesn't flinch when confronted with chaos. Grace's heart stumbled. You're talking about an assistant? Evelyn leaned closer, her voice dropping. Not an assistant, a successor. The word hit like thunder. Grace stared, sure she had misheard. A successor? But you don't even know me. Oh, I know enough, Evelyn replied. Her tone was cool, but her eyes burned with intensity. I know you noticed. I know you acted. I know you didn't run when others would have. That tells me more than any polished resume. Grace's mind reeled. This wasn't what she had prepared for. She had come here hoping for a chance to prove herself in a mid-level role, to finally step out of invisibility. And now Evelyn was talking about something she couldn't even process. That's enormous, she whispered. Why me? Evelyn's gaze softened for the first time. Because once, years ago, someone did the same for me. A stranger carried my burden when I had no strength left. That moment changed my life. I built this company on the belief that small kindness reveals great strength. And now I choose to pass that test on. Grace's hands trembled on her lap. But what if I fail? Evelyn didn't blink. Then you fail. But I'd rather give this chance to someone unafraid of failure than to anyone who only knows how to talk about success. The room was silent, but heavy with meaning. Grace's mind buzzed with doubt, fear, and a flicker of something else. Hope. Evelyn finally stood, her presence filling the office. Think carefully. This isn't just a job, Grace. It's an inheritance of trust, and I don't offer it twice. Grace's breath caught. She realized she wasn't just interviewing anymore. She was standing at the edge of a choice that could rewrite her life.
Grace stared at Evelyn, her mind a storm. Successor. The word felt too big, too heavy, like a coat 2 sizes too large draped suddenly over her shoulders. She had walked in hoping for a job. She had expected questions about spreadsheets, deadlines, performance goals. She had not expected this. Her pulse raced. "I'm not ready for something like that," she blurted. "I can barely convince myself I belong in this room." Evelyn tilted her head, unshaken. "That's exactly why you belong. People who walk in convinced they deserve everything rarely deserve anything. Humility is not weakness, Grace. It's a compass." Grace shook her head. "You don't know my failures. You don't know how many times I've been passed over, how often I've doubted myself." Evelyn's gaze sharpened. "And yet you're here. Despite the doubt, despite the failures, you showed up. Do you think I built this company without failing, without nights where I wanted to disappear? Strength isn't never falling, it's standing up again and again." Grace swallowed hard, her throat tight. She remembered nights spent revising resumes that never got replies, jobs where she had worked harder than anyone but received no recognition. The bitterness, the exhaustion, the quiet voice whispering, "Maybe you're not enough." Now here was Evelyn, a woman who had built an empire, telling her those scars were proof she was ready. "I'm scared," Grace admitted, her voice cracking. "Good. Fear means you understand the weight of what you're stepping into. Only fools are fearless." Grace's hands twisted in her lap. "But what if I disappoint you? What if I can't carry it?" Evelyn leaned forward, her voice low, deliberate. "Then you will learn. And if you fall, you will stand again. That is the only promise I expect. Not perfection, resilience." The words sank deep, stirring something in Grace she had tried to bury for years. Hope, fragile but persistent. She lifted her eyes to Evelyn. "Why me, though? Out of all the people you could choose, why a stranger from a supermarket?" Evelyn's expression softened, almost tender. "Because when no one was looking, you saw me. You didn't calculate, you didn't weigh the cost, you acted out of instinct and kindness. That tells me more about your character than 100 polished candidates." Grace, leadership isn't about titles. It's about choices when no one else is watching. Tears stung at the corners of Grace's eyes. She blinked them back, inhaling deeply. For so long she had begged for someone to see her worth. And now, suddenly, someone did, more than she had dared to hope. But with recognition came responsibility. It terrified her. Evelyn stood, walking to the window. The city stretched out below, its lights flickering against the gray clouds. "Every empire ends eventually," she said softly. "I would rather pass mine to someone who knows how heavy a burden feels than to someone who only craves its power." She turned, her gray eyes locking with Grace's. "So, I ask you, not as a CEO, but as a woman who has seen what kindness can build, will you take this chance?" The silence pressed in. Grace's heart pounded. She thought of her years of invisibility, of nights spent revising resumes that never got replies, jobs where she had worked harder than anyone but received no recognition. The bitterness, the exhaustion, the quiet voice whispering, "Maybe you're not enough." Now here was Evelyn, a woman who had built an empire, telling her those scars were proof she was ready. Her breath trembled. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, steadier. "Yes, I'll try. I'll fight for it. For you, For this! Evelyn's lips curved into the faintest smile. That's all I needed to hear. Grace felt the weight settle onto her shoulders again, but this time it no longer felt too large. It felt like a destiny she had just chosen. The office seemed quieter after Grace spoke her yes, as if the walls themselves had been holding their breath, waiting for her answer. Evelyn studied her a moment longer, then nodded once, as though sealing a pact. "Good," she said simply. "Then we begin now." Grace blinked. "Now? You mean—" "I don't waste time, and neither should you." She pressed a button on her desk phone. "Send in the operations report." Within minutes, a young assistant entered, dropping a thick binder on the polished wood table. Evelyn slid it across to Grace. "This is where we stand. Departments tangled, deadlines missed, contracts slipping. Everyone's waiting for me to fix it. But I want to see what you see first." Grace hesitated, the weight of the binder heavy in her hands. I don't know if I—" "Look," Evelyn said firmly. Grace opened the report, scanning pages of numbers, graphs, scattered notes. At first it blurred together, overwhelming. But slowly, patterns began to emerge, the same instincts that had always guided her in smaller roles. She saw where the lines didn't match, where a team had duplicated work, where a supplier had overbilled without anyone catching it. Her pen hovered, then scratched across the page. Circle here, arrow there, notes forming. For the first time, the problems didn't paralyze her. They beckoned. She glanced up to find Evelyn watching silently, her expression unreadable, but her eyes alive. "You see it," Evelyn said softly. "Don't pretend you don't." Grace swallowed hard. "I see places where things could work better, small changes. Fix the supplier contracts, align the teams. Small changes that lead to big ones," Evelyn finished. Grace nodded, her voice steadier now. "Yes." Evelyn leaned back in her chair, the faintest curve at her lips. "Then you already understand more than half my managers. They chase power. You chase clarity. That's why you'll succeed." The words sent a warmth through Grace's chest, steadying the trembling that had haunted her since the supermarket. For the first time, she felt not like an outsider begging for a chance, but like someone standing where she belonged. Hours passed as they worked side by side. Grace forgot her nerves, lost in the rhythm of problem-solving. Evelyn occasionally asking pointed questions, but mostly letting her lead. When the last page turned, Evelyn closed the binder with a decisive snap. "That's enough for today. You've shown me what I needed to see." Grace leaned back, exhausted but strangely alive. "So what happens now?" Evelyn stood, her silhouette framed against the wide windows. The storm had cleared, the city outside glittered beneath a calm evening sky. "Now you learn. You'll shadow me. You'll make mistakes, and you'll own them. You'll fall, and you'll rise faster. And one day, when this chair is no longer mine, it will be yours." Grace's breath caught. The words felt enormous, but no longer impossible. She rose too, meeting Evelyn's gaze. "I won't waste this." Evelyn studied her a moment longer, then extended her hand. Grace took it, her grip firm despite the tremor in her fingers. "Welcome," Evelyn said simply. The handshake lingered, not just as a greeting, but as a vow. As Grace left the building that evening, the city lights reflected in her eyes. She carried no job offer letter, no official title, nothing tangible to prove the shift that had happened. And yet, everything had changed. The world still saw her as Grace, the woman who once doubted her worth. But she knew better now. She had been tested in silence, weighed by kindness, chosen by vision. Her new beginning had already started.